Hey everybody, this is John for Pioneer Nexus MTG with another deck overview. This time we are looking at Ensoul Aggro, or basically Pump It Up Artifacts.decks. If you do like these deck overviews, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving us a thumbs up, leaving a constructive comment down below, maybe letting us know what deck you'd like to see us cover next. So this deck comes in two distinct flavors, Boros and Izzet, although I guess you could also go Jeskai, but the mana gets a little tricky from there. This deck is based around the idea of pumping up one large creature, hitting your opponent a couple of times, and then shrapnel blasting them to death. To that end, you use things like All That's Glitter to give each enchanted creature +1/+1 for each artifact or enchantment you control, and Michiko's Reign of Truth, mode 1 and 2. Target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each artifact and/or enchantment you control. Then exile this token, it gets +1/+1 for each artifact and enchantment you control, becoming a creature becomes large for them to deal with. Beyond that, you're using difficult to deal with creatures, Ornithopter being an 0/2 flyer, Gingerbrute with the ability to make itself unblockable except for creatures with haste, Goldhound having Menace and First Strike while also being able to be sacrificed for mana in a pinch, Hope of Gearfor as a 1/of flyer that can also be sacked to keep your opponent from casting non-creature spells. 1/of Shadow Spear here, quite nice against racing situations. And then Springleaf Drum as a way to kind of increase your increase your mana production in the early turns, trying to get ahead on mana. All that glitters, yeah, chain creatures +1/+1. Alright, so it's a little bit different for the Ensoul. We'll talk about Ensoul here in a second. Patchwork Automaton is a 1/1 for 2 mana with Ward 2, and then whenever you cast an artifact spell, it gets +1/+1, so it makes it more difficult for your opponent to interact with it on the ward costs. And then Stonesquell Serpent is an XX for X that has Reach, Trample, Protection from Multicolored, which is relevant against decks like Rakdos, where some of their removal, like Dreadbore and Bloodtithe Harvester, is multicolored, and against decks like 5-color Niv, can potentially be just KO on its own. Ingenious Smith is a 1/1 that whenever it enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library, you may choose an artifact and put it in your hand, and then for the first time you cast an artifact or it enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Ingenious Smith. This ability only triggers once each turn. You get some way to cast it during your opponent's turn. You could also get it during your opponent's turn, but this is primarily just another big guy over the course of the games. Also, notably, Darksteel Citadel can be quite annoying, although, yeah. Darksteel Citadel, a little less good in this version, as we'll talk about in Soul why that one specifically a little bit better, but, you know, overall, this is the Boros variant. Get access to the nice Boros cards, access to things like Portable Hole, Showdown of the Skulls for grinding matchups. Obviously, this allows you to look at the top 4 cards. As cheap as your cards are, you're generally going to be able to cast them pretty quickly. Wear Tear for any problematic enchantments or artifacts. Running Volley, you know, we've covered this primarily for spirits, angels, Grease Fang combo, etc. Portable Hole for other aggressive decks. Where the dynamic really changes is with Ensoul Artifact. Now, this is similar execution of what it's trying to do. You're trying to put one of your various pump things on one of your creatures, hit your opponent a couple times, and then shrapnel blast them out of the game. But to that end, Ensoul Artifact says enchant artifact, not creature, artifact. Becomes a 5/5 creature with base power and toughness 5/5. Skilled Animator does something very similar. As long as Skilled Animator is on the battlefield, it does the same thing. Obviously, you know, you're still using things like Ornithopter, Bowmat Courier, Gingerbrute to get in some early damage. Ghostfire Blade is another pumpable thing, allows you to give a creature +2/+2, and it costs 1 to equip for a colorless creature. But where this really comes in is Darksteel Citadel is indestructible. Quite nice that you can have a 5/5 indestructible creature potentially on turn 2, attacking with it on turn 3. Mutavault is a nice way to kind of help close out the game. Oftentimes you're going to get in a hit or 2 with your 5/5 before your opponent can deal with it, and then you just need other ways to chip shot in the final bits of damage. Grafdigger's Cage, quite nice. Creature cards in graveyards and libraries can't enter the battlefield. Players can't cast spells from graveyards or libraries. Useful in some matchups like Izzet Phoenix and such. Not quite as good against Greasefang because Greasefang's vehicle is coming into the graveyard. but still good against some random stuff from that. Is it Phoenix, etc. Shrapnel Blast, obviously the way to close out the game. Sacrifice an artifact to deal 5 damage to any target. Fable the Mirror Breaker helps with the wrong half problem, while also giving you artifacts to play with, and the rest of the cards we've already kind of discussed in the previous variants. Sideboard options, obviously things are a little bit different in this version. Saheeli, Filigree Master, is a way to draw some cards, put some Thopters on the battlefield, as primarily here for the attrition-based matchups. Unlicensed Hearse, any type of graveyard nonsense. Is it Phoenix, Murktide? Not Murktide. Keep saying Murktide, too much modern on the brain. Greasefang, etc. Hairback Walker for the grinding matchups. Unless your opponent has exile-based removal, this can get quite annoying for them to deal with. If they happen to kill it, you put a bunch of Thopters into play. Really problematic card for spot removal to deal with. Rending Volley, once again, Angels, Spirits, Greasefang. Shadow Spear, Racing Situations. Enough said. Obliterating Bolt, Lava Coil with upside that now that it hits Planeswalkers, primarily here for other creature-based decks. What happens when you slap them all together? Mochiko's Reign of Terror, Ensoul Artifact, Black Staff of the Waterdeep, kind of similar effect to Skilled Animator, except for it turns it into a 4/4, but it's not a creature, it's an artifact, so it's a little less vulnerable, I guess, to removal. But, you're still seeing a lot of the same things. Ornithopter, Bowmat Courier, Gingerbread. All these either have invasion or haste or some other way to really pressure your opponent. Automaton, very annoying to deal with. Stonecoil Serpent, very hard for certain decks to deal with or interact with. Shadow Spear for racing situations. Springleaf Drum is just another artifact sitting around, also accelerates you on mana, especially with your 0-drop Ornithopters. This version, man, they are going way in on the 5-color mana. Ether Hub, Darksteel Citadel, Mana Confluence, Spire of Industry, Mutavaults, Darksteel Citadels. Positive of this, you get to play all kinds of weird stuff in your sideboard, like Shaper's Sanctuary to protect from spot removal, Thoughtseize to break up combo decks and control, Stubborn Denial to protect your creatures, Rest in Peace for graveyards along with unlicensors, Damping Sphere here for Lotus Field and Mono Green. Basically it's however you want to build your deck you can. You can go with a super greedy mana base and play all the good spells. You can try for the Is It deck and then you have the Ensoul Artifact and Skilled Animator, or you can go with the Boros one and have All That Glitters and Mochiko as well as Ingenious Smith. Both decks trying to do the same thing. One deck's a little bit better at grinding, one deck's a little bit better at protecting and having counter spells. So just depends on what direction you want to go. Obviously, this kind of deck a little bit vulnerable to spot removal. One Fatal Push can blow up the whole thing, especially if you don't have like a Darksteel Citadel. So once again, black-based removal decks a little bit difficult. White-based removal decks, now that they have access to March of Otherworldly Light, Leyline Binding, all those cards can kind of blow up your strategy pretty nicely. That said, damage-based removal, not that good. So is it Phoenix? Sorry, you have a little bit of a rough time against this deck. Anything that's not dealing with an exile-based removal or a hard removal like, Fatal Push, Heartless Act, well, even Heartless Act does, etc. You need black or white-based removal to effectively combat this and hope your opponent doesn't have a timely Stubborn Denial, timely way to protect it. Basically this deck tries to get in 2 or 3 shots with one big idiot, Shrapnel Blast you to death. That's the general game plan. If you like that kind of strategy, this might be the deck for you. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hope to see you for the next deck overview.